Right, I'm Stephen Jacobs from Organic Farmers and Growers. Welcome to this session. This session is called Seeds Breeding for Whole Food Systems, or How I Stopped Worrying About Yield and Learned to Appreciate Consistent Returns Year on Year. This session is sponsored by Organic Farmers and Growers, the largest certifier of organic land in the United Kingdom. So just quickly to give you the context that we're all looking at, the seed breeding is vital to maintain food security. In recent decades, breeding has been undertaken mainly under the auspice of large multinational companies. The advantages of this is that they bring large investment, but the disadvantages can include a lack of focus to particular regions or bioregions. And some critics have said there's been too tight a focus on yield of any given crop variety at the expense of its overall durability. This is all the more serious now that we have an increased likelihood of extreme climatic events and a worsening state of our ecological support systems. What lies behind these scenarios, and how can we continue to develop seed breeding now and for the future? So I will just, a couple of housekeeping things. You probably already know this. We record all of the sessions. If you don't want your face in the recording, please turn your camera off. The recordings will only be used by the conference. We will upload the recordings in due course after the event. If you have any queries or questions, please put them in the chat. I just will introduce our illustrious panel. Kate McAvoy is from Real Seeds. Real Seeds are a vegetable and fruit, I think, Kate, seed company, small scale, but a very wide network based in Pembrokeshire. Dr. Catherine Howarth is from IBERS at Aberystwyth University. Mark Lee is an organic farmer just over the border with me here in Shropshire. Mark is the primary grower of the oldest recorded Welsh landrace wheat, ein Gymro. And also with us is Dr. Ambrogio Costanzo. Ambro is from the Organic Research Centre. So more on those details shortly. Kate, can you just open your mic and introduce yourself, and off you go.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you very much. Thanks Stephen, and thanks for inviting me. So yeah, as Stephen said, I'm a co-founder of Real Seeds. We're a mail order seed company based in Pembrokeshire, and we sell small packet seed aimed at the home garden and allotment trade. So key things about our seed is that all of it is open pollinated. We don't do any hybrids, and it is all selected specifically for small scale and organic growing. So where this comes from is we started about 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, when we realized there was a real lack of seed available to home gardeners that was specifically selected to meet their needs. And at that particular point, even more so than now, the seed catalogues were featuring, the home garden seed catalogues were featuring more and more F1 hybrid seeds. And there's various issues around that, particularly, I mean, just to give one example, the fact that they have very uniform harvesting times is great if you are doing larger scale commercial production, but it's very inappropriate for a home gardener who wants a spread sort of harvest over a period. There's all sorts of other things like that. So anyway, that's where we came from, and we found that yes, we were right, there was a massive demand, and that's something that we've been growing since then. And actually other people have also been working to do this, and there's been a bit of a change. Although we've always considered ourselves to serve home gardeners, what perhaps is relevant here is that we've also found quite a noticeable number of smaller scale commercial organic producers who buy our seeds when they're not finding the varieties that meet their needs in the commercial catalogues. So yeah, that's what we do. And I think Ellen Rignall from the Seed Sovereignty Programme of the UK and Ireland was going to be here and unfortunately can't be here because she is not well. So I'm just very briefly going to talk a little bit about that as well, if that's good, Stephen.
Yep.
So yeah, we at Real Seeds, we work quite a bit with the Seed Sovereignty Programme. So I've actually also got Ellen's notes, so you'll forgive me if I look at them. So their overall aim is to support a biologically diverse and ecologically sustainable seed system across the UK and Ireland, which is based on organic, locally adapted and open pollinated seed. It's a regionalised programme. There's lots happening in Wales. Katie Hastings, who is the Welsh coordinator, has been working closely with a lot of Welsh farmers, growers and seed producers, training in seed production, building networks and doing things in grain and vegetable seed world. And they're seeing breeding as being the next step for agroecological seed. They're looking at breeding programs around the knowledge and experience of agroecological growers. And basically regionally adapted varieties suited to those systems. And the note that Ellen has made is that they are really looking to work with people where they are, and a lot of the growers that they work with, in the commercial growers that the Seed Sovereignty Programme work with, are currently using a certain amount of F1 hybrid seed where that's doing well for them. But that they're starting to see open pollinated varieties feeding through from European companies such as Sativa and Bingenheimer, which are really meeting those needs of commercial growers. And Ellen has asked me particularly to highlight that they do a lot of partnership work with James Hutton Institute, people like that, and Soil Association and so on, and that they are setting up a future project, which is a field lab with the Soil Association. And they're designing those field labs for growers to look at regional and climate resilient varieties across the country. And if anyone is interested in signing up for those field labs, do register your interest with Katie, the Wales coordinator, or she's not here, but you can talk to me if you want me to put you in touch with the right people. So yeah, if you're interested in looking at varieties that meet regional needs, think about joining that field lab. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I'll put a link in fact, Kate, can you put a link to Real Seeds website in the chat, please? That'd be very helpful. Okay, I'm going to move on to Catherine. Catherine, if you can get ready. Catherine's from IBERS, and Catherine's going to explain what IBERS stands for. And I will share my screen to share your slides in a second. If you could just quickly say who you are, first of all.
Certainly. So my name's Catherine Howarth, and I lead the oat and pulse breeding teams here at Aberystwyth University. IBERS is the Institute for Biological and Environmental Research Sciences. So you want me to share my screen? Or
I'm sharing now. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see. Sure.
Great. Off you go.
Okay, so I'll just give you, I thought it might be useful just to explain how a breeding program can work, particularly in cereals, and with the example of the oat breeding program here at Aberystwyth University. So if you could go on to the next slide.
I will try.
So we've been breeding oats in Aberystwyth and other crops in Aberystwyth since we were established over 100 years ago. And over that time, we've bred a number of crops, and we continue as part of public-private partnerships to grow, to breed for oats, forage grasses, beans, peas, and forage legumes, and more recently, miscanthus. And it's a very successful breeding program. For example, in oats, 65% of the oats used in the UK were bred in Aberystwyth. So oats that were grown in Scotland may well have come from here originally. Next slide, please. So why do we breed new varieties? Well, we all know that, for example, the climate is changing. We need to enhance the genetic diversity of the varieties that farmers have available for them. They need to be able to cope with changes, for example, drought, temperature, waterlogging, changes in disease pressure or pest pressure, because we want to try and maintain yield stability. And we may well need to improve the quality for processing and health, particularly when there are new products that are coming on the market. For example, what makes a variety good for say producing oat milk may be very different from one that's you might want for making porridge. And we also need to ensure that it enhance food safety. So our aim is to develop new improved varieties that are taken up by farmers and used by end users such as millers. Next slide, please. So when you're breeding a new variety, there are many, many breeding objectives that you have to consider. You're not just thinking about one trait in particular. You've got to combine all the desired characteristics into a new variety. And this is a real juggling act. It's a balance. So you want to maintain yield, you want to maintain disease resistance, you want to have all these different traits combined in your variety. And in oats, for example, it's not a big market compared to say wheat, so there isn't a separate designation of oats that are designed for food use or those for feed use, unfortunately. So we have to consider all of these things, which may well be may go against each other when you're in the breeding process. So for example, improving the beta-glucan content is an important aspect, but there always seems to be yield penalties. So you often get penalties when you look at one particular trait as opposed to another. Next slide, please. And the other thing I'd like to say is that the breeding cycle is not fast. We're saying, sorry, I just saw a chat. The breeding cycle is a very long-term process. Oats are an inbreeding crop like other cereals, and so it takes around 12 years to get from your initial cross to producing a variety that's available commercially. And so when we're talking about our breeding objectives, we actually need a crystal ball to think about what will be required in 12 years' time that a farmer or grower is going to need. The first stage of the process starts with the selection of the parents. Usually you will start with a well-adapted variety, and then you use some form of alternative. Second parent will be something contrasting, which may have disease resistance or some other property that you want to incorporate into your crop. And then once you've made the cross, it takes around 8 generations for you to, and in that time you are selecting for your traits of interest, usually in very small quantities at that stage. And by then after 8 generations, you've got back to your inbred state, and you undertake small-scale trials and then large-scale trials over multi-locations. Then once you think you've got a new cultivar that is going to be appropriate for use, it then has to be national listed. This is the statutory testing process, which takes 2 years over a number of locations independently run. And before a variety can enter the national list, it has to meet 2 criteria. One, it has to be distinct, uniform and stable, so that a farmer knows that when he buys that seed, it will behave like we say it will behave. And the other is that it has to have VCU, or value for cultivation and use. So, which means that it has to have a clear improvement over existing varieties. And that is often, well, driven by improvements in yield. After those 2 years of it being, if it succeeds in being national listed, then it can go forward to recommended list testing, and then finally commercialization. Next slide, please. So I just want to give an idea of, this is just to give you an idea of some of the genetic diversity that we have available for us. These are some old oat lines and some of the more modern ones. Firth and Glams at the bottom are 2 modern oat varieties, as is Lennon. And just to see that there is a very wide diversity just in the types of panicle available to us. And we are looking at these old varieties because we don't know what we've lost in the process of breeding modern varieties. And we also collaborate widely with oat breeders across the world to also access different genetic diversity as well. Okay, I think that's it basically. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thank you, Catherine. Now I have to stop sharing there. I've done it. Hurrah. Thank you very much. That was really useful. It's a very good way to frame it, that whole DUSVCU. We can talk about that in a little bit more detail. Mark, if I can ask you to just talk a little bit about who you are and what you do, but also, because I know you have, some interactions that you've had with IBERS.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. We're organic growers from Shropshire. As you said, we're a mixed farm, which is deliberately diverse as we can make it, really. Our main crops are cereals, peas, cattle and sheep, but we produce a very wide range of different cereals, particularly milling cereals for direct sale to millers and bakers. And it's really that, we've been organic a long time, we've been organic for 20 years, and throughout that period we've been frustrated often with the unsuitability of modern varieties for organic cultivation. And we found them increasingly unreliable, I think is fair to say. So not only have we been pursuing the most reliable and appropriate of the modern varieties of cereals for our system, but our growing direct for millers and bakers has changed our focus entirely to one of non-commodity production, but food production. And that means we are much more focused on the flavour, taste, and the distinctiveness, really, of what we produce. Also the provenance and the history of varieties and the whole story that is behind them, because we are now selling food. And selling food is very different from selling commodities, as we all know. So we are producing a mixture of ancient, I suppose, heritage, historic, novel varieties, modern ones, and also mixtures as well. We have, as you said in your first introduction, we took on the responsibility of increasing the Ngumru stock 2 years ago and have done that, and are now the first grower of the Welsh Grain Forum composite Ngumru, which is the way forward, we think, for something which resembles most closely the very variable but the typical landrace that was being grown in Wales up to about 100 years ago.
Yes, and I must declare an interest because I chair the Welsh Grain Forum, and it's so exciting that after all these years we've got people like Mark to help us, because bulking up an older variety from very little seed to begin with, particularly with cereals, is very, very tricky. So thank you, Mark, for your fantastic efforts there. And I know it has been a bit of a struggle at times, but so just moving on before we go into any more depth, Ambro, if we can just ask you to unmute Dr. Ambrogio Costanzo, you're from the Organic Research Centre, and I happen to know that one of the projects you work on is live wheat. What is that, please?
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this session. Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I'm leading the crops research at the Organic Research Centre. We are based in England and work mostly directly with farmers, and Mark Lee is one of our champion farmers we work with, really. And as Stephen mentioned, I'm here today especially because I'm coordinating the live wheat program. This is a research and development program that started under a European project. It is now supported by DEFRA, that aims to actually bridge the gap between what is the plant breeding and what is actually the use of varieties on farm. And we're trying to do this by establishing a network of farmers and researchers. So we are researchers from the Organic Research Centre, and this year we have a group of 18 farmers that undertake some farm experimentation on varieties, mainly on varieties. Basically what we do is that we try to see, especially for weeds, that is a particularly problematic crop, because as most of you may know, this is the most widespread crop, arable crop in UK agriculture, but still is one of, has a very, very little organic acreage, and it's also very shrinking acreage. Every year is less and less grown. What does it mean? Of course, it may be a problem for the organic farmers and growers, but it's also a symptom of a bigger problem. Actually, if wheat doesn't work in organic farming, we started to worry that in a future of agriculture where probably a lot less inputs will be used and all agriculture needs to be much more agroecological, much more low inputs than it is now, probably wheat won't work even there, even in the non-organic world. That's why we're trying to see what is actually happening on the ground. Of course, we have some hypotheses in the background, so we started to think that probably what varietal choice is a major choice, especially in organic farming, because basically on a 1 year, on a crop cycle level, that's the only major choice a farmer can do, choosing the right variety, because you don't have fungicides or fertilizers to apply, of course. So we know that, number one, how varieties perform in conventional agriculture doesn't apply to how they perform in organic farming. Second, we know that especially in organic farming and also in any very low input farming, what you can see from plot trials, so trials like the one in the pictures that Catherine was showing earlier, is much less predictive of what's going to happen at a field scale. This can work in conventional farming when you apply herbicides, fertilizers, etc. What you see in the small plots that you saw earlier may predict what's going to happen at a field scale. But in organic farming, this is much trickier than in conventional farming. So you need to focus also on what happens at a field scale. And third, of course, we know that every farm, especially if you are under organic management, and also if it will be perhaps not organic, but very low input, is going to be very different from any other farm, not only in terms of climate and soil, but also in terms of management. So to try and understand all this question is, we are now at the 4th year, we are actually distributing seeds of varieties to a number of farmers, as I was mentioning earlier. And we are trying to compare them to one another into the different environments, according to a statistical design that has been quite laborious to figure out, that allows us to analyze then the results from the whole group and to understand how these varieties perform overall, as well as into each individual farm. In this process, we are testing modern varieties, we are testing historic varieties, so the varieties that were bred, for example, in the 60s. One of our champion varieties is Mary Sweegian, but as well we collect information on a lot of the varieties that Mark Lee is growing at the moment. We are also testing populations. So the key one is the ORC weaklings population known as YQ that has been generated by under the guidance of Professor Martin Wolf in the past 20 years. And it's actually a crop in which virtually every plant is different from any other plant, because it doesn't descend from a cross between 2 parents, but it does descend from a cross between 20 parents. And then it's been just reproduced as such, and it's been adapted to the fields where it's grown. So it's virtually something that is not DUS, as Catherine was saying, is not distinct, is not stable, and is not uniform, and it doesn't want to be. But still, it has a place probably in the future of agriculture. And this year, we are also adding to the mix, rightly say, variety mixtures to see how they perform. And this is more or less the picture of what we're doing, and happy to give you any details.
Great stuff.
During
Thanks,
the conversation. I just put in a link on the chat if anyone wants to have
yes, please. While you do
fun.
that, I just want to introduce the last member of the team. Andrea Sanders is here to help moderate today's session. Andrew is from Lambton Seed Library, amongst other things. Do you want to say hello and wave, Andrea?
Hi.
Andrew will be helping to moderate, so she'll have a look at the chat, see if anybody's got any comments or questions or whatever. Thank you. So we've outlined the frame of it all. We could walk away at that point, couldn't we, really? But I wanted to ask, what is the problem we're trying to solve? in seed breed. So we have this issue where, and I've put it as a bit of a jokey comment really in the subtitle, meaning how I stopped learning to worry about yield and learn to appreciate consistent return. The reason I put that is that because we've got Mark growing crops, Mark's been organic with FWYD for 20-something years, and over the years, Mark and I have discussed it's quite a bumpy transition from a high input farming or even moderate input farming status to an organic status, where you can't use artificial nitrogen, you can't use glyphosate, etc., etc. That's fine, but then along comes the weather, and you've got now more extreme weather than we've seen perhaps for quite a while, and more events of extreme weather than perhaps we've ever seen. So how can seed breeding, everything from cereals to vegetables, including oats right the way through to sunflowers, how can we see those things, as Catherine says, it can take 5, 10, 12 years or more to go through the process. What are the traits we're looking for? How can those traits be trialed in situations appropriate to a farm system that is not reliant on artificial inputs? So I suppose if I can, Catherine, put that question first of all to you. How does IBERS, and bearing in mind everybody, IBERS is at Aberystwyth University. Aberystwyth University was also home to the Aberystwyth Plant Breeding Station, and it was at the Aberystwyth Plant Breeding Station that the first record of Hain Gunro was noted in 1919. So Catherine, plant breeding in a modern context.
Oh, right, that's a very big.
It is a big question, sorry. Just pick one piece of that.
One of the things I'll say is that yield stability is a holy grail, but it's something that's extremely difficult, even under conventional systems. And if you look at yield in particular, there is a huge variation between different environments, and it's the weather that kind of determines a lot of the yield. Whether if you have a wet summer and you don't have so much sunshine, you get very much lower yields, for example, irrespective of whether you're using artificial nitrogen or farmyard manure or whatever. So actually understanding that yield stability and the interaction of your variety with the environment it's grown in is really important. And I think understanding that relationship is important, because you want to have a variety that performs well under a wide range of conditions, rather than one that does very, very well under very particular conditions. But persuading somebody that you want something that a variety that doesn't have perhaps 105% yield compared to our other varieties, but has the same yield, but it's more stable, that is very hard to get accepted. I think so.
Yes, thank you. No, that's very true. And I think that's where we need to understand that farmers need to balance the payments, otherwise they can't be growing anything, however it's bred. Mark, one of the issues there obviously is that you've got to return enough each year to pay the rent or pay the bills. I know actually, because we know each other, that you've managed to spread your risk to some extent and are running your own trials as well as those you're working with the Organic Research Centre.
Yes, I mean, we trial things all the time, and there's a lot of trials, probably far too many trials on this farm. Every field seems to have something different in it, and we're always looking for ways to do things better. The live wheat trials have certainly been a part of that for the last few years, at trying to address the specific issue of variability of modern varieties under organic systems. And I think what Catherine just said about the difficulty of persuading farmers to see reliability as a priority rather than yield as a priority is more, it's more easy perhaps to persuade organic farmers, because the modern varieties are more unreliable. With the security blanket of chemistry and the other inputs which are inclined to level the playing field in from one farm to another and 1 year to another, modern varieties which have a yield edge are more likely to show that benefit, where in an organic situation, I've always felt we're more exposed to the basics, if you like, the basics of soil and weather. And as such, we find that obviously those are always different. Every year, those two things are always different in every way possible. And that can find out a variety that only performs well under ideal conditions. So the issue of persuading farmers to prioritise reliability is perhaps easier with organic ones, which is where YQ comes in that Ambro was talking about. YQ was developed to be reliable because of its diversity, because it wasn't a monoculture. And that's something which is undoubtedly works. There's no question YQ works, and that diversity doesn't give us a top yielding wheat, but it does give us, as Martin would always have said, it never gives us the top yielding wheat, but it will always give us a reliably good performing wheat year in, year out. And that's perhaps what we see more with older wheats, which many of which are land races themselves and still contain huge diversity. The diversity for me is the key to reliability and endurance, as you said at the start, really.
Thank you. And I just want to underline that the situation Mark's in a fully certified organic farm that's had a crop rotation, it's got livestock. Mark's been putting composted green waste onto the land. It's that integration, I think, that where something, the benefit of something else put very cleverly with another item starts to yield benefits, but it's how we find those benefits. Kate, if we can turn to you, one of the things that we've been talking about here is cereals, but of course F1 hybrids in veg, it's a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
But I would say it is different, but there, am I still, have you got me there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, there we go. It is different, but actually I see a lot of overlaps with the things that people are saying here. I think it is really interesting what you're saying, Mark, about the fact that you're always doing trials, you're looking about sort of stability of yield. And really, it seems to me a lot of it is actually about transforming the food system in the widest sense. It's not very narrowly about the varieties. That's far too simplistic, because if you try and take, you know, a very diverse variety and put it into the commodity market or put it into the supermarkets, it's not going to work. Whereas, I mean, just coincidentally, entirely coincidentally, I had a loaf of bread for my lunch, which I happen to know was of wheat that was grown on your farm, Mark, which is rather nice. And I know which variety it was, and I know which year's seed it was. And that's a whole different way of thinking about the food system. And I do think within the vegetable world, it's very interesting looking at the European approach to breeding versus the American approach to breeding. On what you might call the sort of lunatic fringe of breeding on both sides, perhaps. So the EU people, like I think Ellen mentioned in her notes, Sativa, those biodynamic producers are looking to almost replicate what an F1 offers to a commercial grower. Not entirely, but they are looking for much more uniformity. Whereas if you look at the American seed breeders who are breeding for the organic vegetable market, they are much more diverse. And there's that whole thing like the YQ, there's a lot of people working, or not a lot, but there are people working with what they call GREXs, constructed land races, diversity, looking at consistency of yield through diversity, which is very effective in many ways in dealing with varieties of, you know, weather and so on. But then you need to sell that into a food system that appreciates that, which is usually a box scheme or a CSA or a market stall, where your customers really appreciate what they're getting, and it's all about flavour, and it's not about a product that will sell consistently into the supermarket. So I think actually the problem is very similar. It's just, it's in a slightly different place. And as I say, we started playing this game with Real Seeds 20 years ago, thinking that we were talking to home gardeners. And now we discover we're talking to organic market gardeners with a lot of the stuff, because they actually are looking for the same things, which is, I think is quite interesting.
It is, and I think that whole commercial, domestic or residential side, perhaps the more that comes together, the better there is, or deeper there is, an understanding of where our food comes from. Talking of understanding and deeper connections, Ambro, one of the strengths of a participatory program like Lively is that you bring farmers from across the country together, and I think I'm right in saying they're not all organic.
Yes, the project started as under the brand of Live Seed 4 years ago, and with 7 organic farms. And this year we are also including 4 non-organic farms. Each one of them has their own path of innovation, whether it is regenerative agriculture or organic conversion or no-till or the like. So yes, we also have this year, from last year actually, the comparison between organic and non-organic farms, and there are quite interesting insights that come out of it. Regarding to how this can deal with the big question that you made earlier, I just remember one anecdote. It was I found it very informative. We were in a meeting with Mark Lee and yourself at the Organic Real Farming Conference 3 years ago, just when we had just started this program. And we were sitting at the table, so it was with Mark Lee as a farmer and a breeder from a breeding company. And at some point, regarding the aspect about stability, as many of you know, try bear with me if it seems a bit difficult, but it's a quite important concept, that you can have stability over space, so something that performs well everywhere, and stability over time, so something that can perform well year on year. The two things are too much being confused so far, but they are two very different things. And just to make this understand, I've asked the question to say, to highlight the fact that the breeder would like to have stability over time, but it's especially focusing also on something that works well everywhere. Whereas when I asked Mark Lee whether he was interested in having a variety that would work well on many other farms as well, he said, well, I'd like every farmer to have a variety that works well for them, but I need to make sure that I have a variety that works well for me. Variety means crop, whatever it can be. This unveils that the things are a little bit more complex than what the ideal things are, because there are 2 aspects here, at least 2 aspects. One is the biological, technical, and the other one is political and economical. From the biology and technical aspects, of course, we need to see that varieties would need to work well on every farm, but this may just be in contrast with working well everywhere. For example, Mark Lee has been growing the population YQ, he's performing very well at his own farm. Part of it might be due to the fact that he's been producing his own seeds, so that this diversity enables the population to adapt. From the political side, of course, the breeding cycle, as Catherine excellently explained earlier, is quite long and expensive. And if someone has to breed to generate the seeds and to create the new, call them varieties or the like, it may not take the entire 12 years. For a population, it may be less, but still, it takes an investment. So in a way, there needs to be a compromise between the two aspects. So a participatory program is trying to say to talk to the breeders from inside and say, what are the characteristics that make a crop suitable for organic farming or farmers that are innovating in the sense of agroecology. Is trying to help the farmers to make their own experimentation, because there is no one single action to do to become a better agriculture, but probably the only real action to do is to embed some experimentation into each farm. And in this sense, we're trying to find what is the best way through. You see what I mean? So that's ultimately the thing. I'm just seeing the chat. And yes, definitely yield is one trait. But even there, I mean, there are many other traits that you need to look at yield. I could summarize it like this. Generally, when the breeding program is explained, someone starts from the initial cross, from where the population is generated and the selection is made for the variety. I'm a bit provocative and generally try to start from the last step, which is testing varieties, because you can do fantastic breeding, but if you don't have a good mechanism to test varieties, nobody will know which varieties will work where. That's what really we're trying to do. And in this case, in this sense, the participatory program is essential to bring people together as a collective. And want to highlight that every farmer takes their own information out of the project, but this is very much working as a information generated by a group and used by a group of farmers and then made useful for others. And regarding to the fact European and American breeding, there is another thing I wanted just to highlight, that yes, the European seed sector has something as an additional barrier towards the American seed sector, which is the red tape and administrative burden. For example, the VCU with the US protocol, all this extensive testing to be allowed on a catalog is quite a barrier for a smaller breeding initiative, and this has helped probably the larger corporation to concentrate the breeding in their own hands. Of course, on the other hand, on the American side, on the other side of the pond, as you say, everything is in the invisible hand of the market, and of course, it can facilitate innovation, but it can also hide some threats. So even there, we need to find a way through, like for anything else. There are two extremes, and we need to take the goods of both to see what is the better organization for the future.
Thank you. Very well put. Catherine, you were nodding vigorously during that, particularly when Amber was talking about proving trial results or you know, being able to go through that whole expensive breeding program, but then proving the value of that and working with groups of farmers.
Yes, yes, I think it's very important to involve farmers in the testing process, and I mean we try and test varieties over in multi-locational trials, and I agree that that's a sort of a proxy for trying to get lots of different environments, because any individual farmer is only wanting to have a variety perhaps that does well for them on their farm, but we have to try and get as many different environments as possible to see how varieties perform. And it's a numbers game. The more trials you have, the better information you have. I mean, when we produce a new variety and it's been successful, a farmer will sometimes say, well, you know, do you recommend using this variety as opposed to the previous one you have, which we know is very reliable? And that is an extremely difficult question to answer, because obviously you want them to take up a new variety, but it hasn't had that test of time, and it does take time to be able to prove whether a variety is going to be successful. I suppose the only other comment I'll make is I quite agree. The food system is key to this. As far as a lot of cereal production is concerned, of course, it is a commodity, and what drives variety uptake is often driven not by the farmer actually, but it's driven by the end user. It might be driven by the commercial mill that they're supplying, whether that be oats. I know that's certainly the case in oats, and I'm sure it's the case in wheat as well. So we have to consider that it is the end user actually, the industrial end user has a say on what varieties are grown as anything else.
Thank you. Ambro, you wanted to just quickly come back on that?
Yes, testing varieties on different farms. What we're trying to do is not only the different location, because for instance, also the HDB with the recommended list tests varieties in many different locations. The only problem is that they're testing with the same protocol everywhere, whereas for us, the protocol is the farmer. This doesn't mean that the two things integrate. You see, they are not in contrast to one another. The other thing I want to say, yes, it's important to involve farmers into the variety testing aspect, is crucial. Ideally, I would like to see farmers involved even in the earlier stage of the breeding program. There is only one problem, that this needs a serious and careful political organization, because if farmers are participating to the breeding, and it may happen that breeding companies, I'm not talking about universities that work for the public, but there may be breeding corporations that ask you, do you want to participate in the breeding and select varieties with me, etc., on your farm, etc. In that case, bear in mind, especially talking to the farmer, you are co-owner of the intellectual property of those varieties, and make sure that the breeders actually acknowledge that. Whereas, of course, ideally, this is very, I think is the holy grail to identify methods where the breeding could actually be done with the farmers, but this requires a really horizontal and participatory organization, also in terms of benefits sharing. That was just my last 5 minutes.
I know, absolutely. But then one of the aspects that we're covering here is not cereal seeds, Kate. So you're looking at open source as well, aren't you? And how much of what Real Seeds is doing is looking at veg through that lens, and why? You're muted.
Sorry.
Well done.
That is a really interesting question. I mean, we don't do breeding, I should point this out. But I do think that one thing that we know quite a lot of people who do breeding, and truthfully, the people we know that do breeding for the sort of market that we're looking at are either coming through the biodynamic movement, so they are essentially subsidized through that, or they are breeding as a side project alongside a commercial seed company. So they're cross-subsidizing their breeding work, and they're doing it out of the love of it, to be honest. In a lot of cases, I think of someone like Frank Morton in the United States, who has devoted his life to breeding amazing salads. But he's releasing those under the open source seed initiative, which some of you may have heard of. So he's releasing those to the wider world and not looking to protect them. Realistically, actually, I think this question about how do you make money on seeds, on seed breeding with a vegetable seed variety, actually the way to do it is grow the seed and sell the seed, because the market is there. And so that, actually making a royalty. Some open source breeders ask for voluntary royalty. So we have some varieties we do with that, but it's never going to be a major income. People make money by selling the seed. And the other thing briefly I'd like to touch on, which is not relevant, I realise, but is relevant to open pollinated vegetables, is the issue of maintenance of varieties, because that is something that tends to get ignored when talking about breeding. It's the fact that production of vegetable seed is pretty much not happening in the UK these days. A tiny fragment of the UK vegetable seed production actually happens in this country. We grow a certain amount, a few other people do, but there's not a great deal. And so variety maintenance is happening in countries with very, very different climates. And with an open pollinated variety, that obviously actually has an implication on the variety, because as you maintain the variety, as we all know, issues of drift, issues of selection, they're happening in very, very different climates. So I think that's just, I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but that's something, and I mean, it's what we talk about when we're encouraging people to look at a much more localized seeds production, is that it seems to me very hard to have a seed industry selling seed into Wales, for example, where most of the seed is grown in South America, in Asia, somewhere like that, completely different climate and conditions. This is just another little problem for us, I guess.
Well, yes. Where do you get? You built a catalogue of seed, I take it, over the years.
Yeah. We grow a certain amount ourselves. We grow about a third, and we get quite a bit from Italy, actually, where they still grow quite a bit of seed, which obviously is still not a similar climate to Wales, but actually there's some really good seed there. We get some seed from the States, but seed that we used to be able to buy from the States, for example, we're now finding has been being multiplied in China, and the quality is falling off. So it's an ongoing issue for us, and we're trying to develop how much is grown in the UK. We're looking to develop a network of seed breeders. That's how come we got involved with the seed sovereignty program, but it is an ongoing and live issue, I would say.
No, absolutely. Mark, if I can turn to you then, where do you get good seed? How do you know what is good seed? And I'll prime that with saying 2 words, Maris Widgeon. You're on mute, by the way.
Maris Widgeon we've been fortunate to get because Maris Widgeon was preserved largely by the thatching industry, the small thatching industry. So we've been able to take advantage of the fact that it had been continued, fresh seed had been continued to be produced. We have a range of sources. Ancient and heritage things are in the hands of enthusiasts largely. They're obviously outside of the seed royalty system. So quite how, I heaven knows who's listening to this, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but quite how legal a lot of what we do is, I'm not really sure. I mean, things like einkorn and emmer, the true ancient cereals are literally shared by people. Heritage cereals, similarly, particularly land races, they're not easily identifiable anyway. I mean, the growers of hen Gymru, and you can tell hen Gymru is hen Gymru when it grows, but not in great detail. They've been preserved by enthusiasts and they are maintained by enthusiasts, I think. We have benefited somewhat from novel breeding, but on a trials level. So we've been able to grow some crosses of modern cereals with heritage cereals. But that's only on a trial scale. Those things are not a part of the recommended seed system. What we've tended to do, because obviously we can't breed cereals, I wouldn't know where to start, and it would be disastrous for me to try. What we've started to do more of, and I'm particularly excited about here, are mixtures, which we can do very, very simply. And we are producing one of our main milling crops now, this year just sown, and last year, is an 11-way mix, which we have designed ourselves. So we've assembled a mixture of varieties of which seed we can get, that we hope will complement each other to produce something that our customers really like. In doing so, we've created something which is unique to us as well, which makes it more marketable. But it hopefully gives us the resilience that diversity brings and the flavour that diversity brings also. So we're very excited about that. So for me, on a farm level, where I can't breed cereals, but mixtures are infinitely possible, and very simply so.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Kate, just sorry, we're jumping around a bit, but Mark's mentioned customer, and it's come up in the chat as well. You're growing for, you were saying originally, I think you said home users, but that's now broadened out.
I mean, essentially, we consider ourselves to be a home garden seed company, and we sell in packets aimed at home garden growers. We don't want to be a seed company. It sounds awful. We don't want to be a seed company selling to commercial growers, just because that's not what we do. You know, we consider ourselves to be people who are looking to fulfill that role of meeting the needs of home and allotment scale growers who have, you know, things like tall peas, for example, pretty relevant to commercial growers, ideal for home garden growers. I think what has become obvious is that there was and there is a major market gap in seed to that small and medium scale organic commercial producer. And fortunately, there's some great people. I mean, obviously there are people who meet that need, Tamar example, of course, and of course the seed cooperative has started recently, and they are really much more looking to meet that need. So yes, I've lost the thread of where I am. I'm just trying to read the chat of what people are talking about.
I know, it's interesting.
It's really hard to follow both. My apologies to people putting it in the chat. The end user is really, really important. I think, you know, and flavour, which is being talked about, I can see in the chat, and about making sure that you are actually, sorry, but let me formulate what I'm trying to say. It's, if you are trying to, pragmatically, if you're trying to meet the needs of a big industrial buyer, you are not going to be able to do that with small scale, diverse populations in a financially viable way, I think, at the moment. So I guess all of us here, like Mark, are trying to look at ways that we can actually get our food directly to the consumer and capture all that value, and at the same time have a much more sustainable way of producing food. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's...
I think I'm trying to answer too many questions at once. I'm sorry.
We have only this time to discuss something that is so big.
The legal point is a very important one, actually. If I could just touch very, very briefly on that. I think that the vegetable seed world has benefited enormously from the fact that there has been a derogation option in the seed marketing regulations, which has allowed what they called varieties for particular conditions to be sold without meeting all these DUS and VCU tests. It's become known as the amateur varieties derogation, because mostly it is varieties being sold into the amateur market, but actually variety for particular conditions and organics is mentioned in the legislation as one of those particular conditions. So I think that has made a very, very big difference over, I think it was 2013 that came in, 2012, 2013. And I can see that actually you desperately need something like that in the grains world. Obviously there's the organic heterogeneous material. For those who don't know it, there has been an EU, another option for selling constructed land races without, again, meeting these testing requirements into the organic market, which I think it's certainly in EU legislation, and I think it's coming through into the UK. Stephen, you probably know better than me. Whether
next year, not next year now, because the European Commission have paused the introduction of the new organic regulation, so it'll come in 2022.
Are the UK picking it up? Because that seems very unclear. DEFRA have been very unclear. But anyway, it's something like that is needed, but it needs to be not just into the organic certified market, as far as I can see, because that's very limiting. And I would have thought that the scope for lobbying for some equivalent for the varieties for particular conditions derogation to be existing in the grains market would be strong. And my suspicion is that DEFRA would be open to that from, certainly, I don't know, but I don't know whether they are different in the grains world, but certainly they seem to be open at the moment, once dust settles from DEFRA, to lobbying along those lines, where they can sort of regulate unregulated trade in an acceptable way for everybody.
Yes, it's potentially the case that ministries will be open to these things. Of course, one of the things that we also know is that agriculture is largely a devolved issue. So how things in Wales are treated by the Welsh government and how that would or would not interact with what comes out of Westminster is a moot point. One of the issues that's come up, Andrea's telling me in the chat, is the interface between yield and ecology. And so one of the reasons for the heterogeneous, the diversity, the requirement for a wide genetic base is for us, if we go back to how I started this conversation with the extreme climatic events, how do we move that forward? Do we change the breeding program? Do we change the farming system? Or is it a bit of both? And obviously that's a massive question, but if anybody wants to jump in at that point, we have 15 minutes before we have to close, and everybody else, you're welcome to put chat or comment in the chat. Catherine.
Well, I just, one comment is that perhaps there's been quite a lot of talk about the use of mixtures as a way forward, and I think that there could be a lot of scope there, whereas currently we are growing everything, well, in the cereal world, things tend to be grown as monocultures. We've had talk about the use of populations and the use of land races, but actually mixtures of modern varieties have a lot of scope. There's also, I found it difficult to follow the chat at the same time as listen to people, but there's been quite a lot of talk about the end user, and I mean, and what are we breeding for? Who is the end user? Well, obviously the ultimate end user is the person who eats the grain, but we mustn't forget the processes that in between. So you've got to have grain that's easy to mill, that there has to be characteristics of it that make it available to those consumers in a cost-effective way. Whether industrial milling is the way we should be going is another matter. I don't, perhaps beyond this conversation. But for oats, oats have to be are milled by large mills, and they have to be of a specification that they can efficiently work, so that they are a major consideration in how we breed new varieties.
Yes, thank you. Kate, you've got your hand up.
Can I have a quick question for Catherine? I know something that has actually come up in discussions in the small scale people I'm dealing with who are interested in putting some grains into a rotation is whether there is the possibility of having some small scale oat processing machinery in Wales, if people should be seeking to arrange that in some way or to build that, if that's something that a group of people could work towards. Would you see that as viable as someone who's actually breeding oats?
It's a wonderful idea, and it's something that we're talking about actively. It's not straightforward. It is possible, but yeah, I mean, I've been discussing this with Katie, because we are very keen to encourage people to grow oats, but it is a major barrier actually for uptake of oats as a new crop in this rejuvenated crop in Wales. But yeah, so it is something we're looking at.
I think that's one of the things that people might be interested to know. I was talking with Avon Williams, many of you will know, RSPB Cymru, some years ago, looking at old maps of Wales. And Wales was pockmarked with arable. Obviously, a lot of that arable was grown to feed the horses. And then the horses were used to operate the farm machinery. The thing with oats, another thing about oats, obviously, is that for the human food market, what happens in the big corporate world is that, and most of the oats that are available, in fact, nearly all, will have gone through a heat treatment in order to stabilize the enzyme in the oat. The oat it has two things against it. One is a very excitable enzyme, and the other is a high fat content. So once you've rolled the oat, if you haven't, they tend to use steam, but you could put it in a kiln. If you haven't heat stabilized it, then you will see it go off in days or weeks. I haven't seen it go more than 10 days without going off, so that is an issue. Jane Powell is just reminding me that we will be discussing farming history and cereals on Thursday morning at 11:45. So just to go over that historical aspect again. And Andrea is pointing out a question from the chat. What proportion of seed used in the UK is grown in the UK? I'm assuming bread in the UK is actually what we're saying there. Don't know. Anybody want to come in?
On the vegetable side, I can tell you that it's a teeny tiny proportion. Very little vegetable seed is produced in the UK. I should imagine grain, it would be a lot more.
Catherine?
All our grain is produced in the UK, but there is some spring oats I know will have been brought in from European breeders. And the same with wheat and barley, I'm sure.
Ambro, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just reinforce what Catherine is saying. Most of it is definitely produced here, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's been bred in the UK.
Okay, thank you.
For wheat, most of the time is bred outside.
So just to end, because we've got 10 minutes to go, what's the way forward? Mark, if I can just come to you first. One of the things you're doing is closing the gap between you as a food producer and your customers. For you, that means that I think I'm right in saying you're going to install a mill on the farm.
We are, yeah. I mean, that's a logical thing for us to do in a sense of this change that has happened, that started some years ago. We started growing peas for human consumption for hodmedodds, and that really changed the way we view food production or crop production and changed it into food production. So yes, the logical thing for us is whilst we use other mills largely, Anne and Andy Parry at Fellinganol currently, and absolutely intend to continue to do that, we would like to be able to engage on a very local level, on a small scale. We don't do that successfully as a farm, and it's something that we would like to do more of. So a small mill for us is a logical way to supply that niche, if you like, but only on a very small scale. Far more important to us will continue to be the scale of the grain sales, but it's all about feedback. It's all about baking, really. And we're fortunate with social media now, we're able to connect effortlessly with consumers, end consumers, even of large scale crops like the peas that go off and go via a company like Hodmedod. I can still engage directly with the people who eat those things. And that never used to be possible. I think one of the joyful things about organic farming is you get closer to consumers, but once you start producing food rather than commodities or lorry scale products, we're able to engage so directly that we can talk about the subtleties of taste and flavour and baking functionality immediately. Most of our wheats from this year are test baked almost straight away, and so we've got real feedback on how they've baked and how they taste before we even start selling them, which makes it so much more exciting, so much more interesting for us as producers, and hopefully so much better for the consumers, because we are so focused on those attributes which are obviously relevant to them.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Any last words, Catherine?
Well, I guess something we haven't touched upon is why most breeding is in the hands of large multinational companies, which is what you mentioned at the beginning. And that was partly, that was a political decision when near market research in the UK, at least, was privatized in the 80s. And very little breeding work actually takes place in the public sector in Europe at all now. And that has quite a lot of consequences on what is bred and how it's bred and why it's bred.
So there's been a question, thank you, that's a very good point. There's been a question on gene editing and its value. Does IBERS get involved in any of that?
It's not something that I'm involved in. I mean, gene editing at all, we don't, but there is some experimental work, yes.
I will hold up my hand and say I'm personally researching it, and so far I have found that the only value of that biotech gene editing route is in the shareholders of the large multinationals. I haven't yet seen a program where the returns are delivered directly to the farmer, either financially or even agronomically, but I'm happy to discuss those things with people should they wish. Ambro, any last words?
Yeah, that's to reinforce what Catherine was saying. Mark was mentioning Mariswigian as a very good variety. Mariswigian was bred in a public plant breeding institute, and so the breeding landscape that we have today is the child of the Thatcher-Reagan era, anyway. But that's where we are. The challenge is massive, and we need to all work on these small-scale aspects. The only thing I want to say, just because I always like to say something that people won't necessarily like. I think if you think of organic, the organic market, I think there were OFNG data that the UK is just producing 33% of the grain, talking about the grain, of course, of the market demand, and just even under 25% of the feed demand. So also, I would say also the animals are a user, and all these sort of 60 or 70% of market demand that is met with imports, there's also a space that we need to look at and to in a way to conquer. This would need to work step by step towards a reasonable transition. That's my last word, I would say. Let's not forget the big picture.
No, indeed. And I just want to underline what you and what Catherine's been saying is that the original plant breeding institutes were publicly funded. The move to privatization, perhaps we could look at readdressing that and perhaps changing that structure. I think we would perhaps be less than responsible if we're going to leave that to politicians, but at the same time, I'm not sure we can leave it to private enterprise either. So one of the things that I wanted to finish on is to say thank you to everybody, also to look at the website, which I'm going to just put in there. There's more conference activity today at 3:30. There is the video from Garden Organic, tea break tips, how to become a climate change savvy home food grower with Kim Stoddard from Garden Organic. And then at 4:15, Lawrence Woodward will lead a conversation on managing health from farm to fork. At 6 o'clock, there's the farming quiz. And at 8, there will be a session on how can we make Wales a productive landscape in the 21st century. So we're not short of content. Tomorrow we will be on again. One of the things I'd like to say is if anybody wants to follow stuff up, please get in touch with me or through the conference website. There is also our Padlet, where we are encouraging people to write stuff up. Ambrose puts on there a link to a YouTube video, and I will add to that. Has anybody, we've got 2 minutes left, anybody got a last word to say? I don't want to dominate more than I already have. That's not true, I quite like dominating, but. Okay, well, in that case, what I will say is thank you very much for coming along, particularly to Mark, who I really appreciate as a sole trader, and to Kate as a sole trader. Thank you very, very much. Really, thank you for the support from Andrea as a moderator, and very much to Catherine and Ambro for your professional guidance. It's been really useful. I'd like to see this conversation repeated and taken further. The Wales Real Food and Farming Conference is a collective. This was a co-created event. We would like to do more of these, and we take all comments very much and look for more guidance from you all. So thank you very much.